Welcome to Tech Unheard, the podcast that takes you behind the scenes of the most exciting developments in technology. I'm Rene, your host and CEO of ARM. Today, I'm joined by Jayshree Ullal, President and CEO of computer networking company Arista Networks. Jayshree spent her early career working in the semiconductors at Fairchild Semiconductor and Advanced Micro Devices, then spent a decade and a half at Cisco, where she led their data center, switching, and services groups, before going on to lead one of America's foremost tech companies. Jayshree, welcome to ARM. Welcome to Tech Unheard. Thank you for coming all this way.
Well, it wasn't that far. It's a mile away, but thank you for having me.
We didn't know where exactly you had come from, so only a mile away, so very happy.
I could have walked on a good day.
Yeah, today's a nice day.
Gorgeous, yes.
Thank you so much for joining us. You and I have not known each other super long, but in some ways we have in terms of when we think about our years in the industry and where our paths cross. And one of the things I love to do to kick these things off is just have the guests tell me a little bit about their upbringing and not only where you grew up, but how you kind of got into the world of tech.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Let me start at the very beginning. I was born in London in Paddington General Hospital. So my early years were very much shaped by British influence. Even today, I like a good cup of tea and cucumber sandwiches, and I like to watch cricket when time permits, at least the highlights. But I was raised mostly in New Delhi, India. So a lot of my formative years was in India, where I went to an all-girls Catholic school.
When did you leave the UK?
About 4 or 5 years of age.
Do you remember the UK then?
I do remember because my younger sister was born. And I actually remember the cruise. My dad chose to go by ship rather than by plane. So it was 21 days. So I remember that well, including going through the Suez Canal. And it was a long journey, which ended up in the port of Bombay. And my late aunt was so excited to see me because none of them had seen me since birth. She tried to lift me and she couldn't. So that's a different story. My parents certainly made sure that I was well fed.
So Delhi.
Yes.
And you went to, you said, an all-girls school.
Yes. So in those days, and I think it's still true in India, that the best education is the private schools that are typically run by systems defined abroad. So it was run by Catholic Irish nuns. My parents are Hindu, so I had a lot of influence to the Hindu culture, but I also got to experience a lot of the Catholic culture, and Christmas was a great holiday spirit. We learned all the songs and we knew all that good stuff. And so it was nice. It was a nice secular upbringing, I would say.
So what started to get your slant towards engineering and tech? When did that happen?
Probably happened much later in the high school years, if you say, because I was there from kindergarten through graduation. And what happens is you are asked to kind of fork in the road. Are you in humanities or are you in science? Is kind of what the teachers pose to you. And mine was through a process of elimination because I wasn't good at a lot of the humanities subjects. And I liked math and physics, although the biology dissections of the frogs left much to be desired. But they make you actually take a board exam where you decide which way you go. And in my case, it wasn't clear-cut that I was absolutely good at science or terrible at humanities.
And this is what, like grade 9, 10
grade
equivalent?
9 is probably teenage years.
Yep.
Out of the 200 students, 150 end up in humanities, sections B, C, D, and section A is the science section of smart kids. So there's a little danger in that because all of a sudden all the smart kids are in one section and you thought you were smart, but then so is everyone else. But through a process of elimination, I think I found myself in that field because the other ones I wasn't as good at: history, geography, needlework, foreign languages. Those were all not my strengths. So I veered to my strengths.
But did you have an interest in science and engineering, electronics? Yeah.
Not engineering and electronics so much, but I had more of an interest in pure science.
Pure sciences.
Yeah. Because engineering and electronics were not fields in high school, right? But if you were good at physics and you were good at math and you're good at chemistry, and in fact, had I stayed in India, I would have probably gone towards a pure science route.
So what then after that period? What to your university years? How did you make that choice?
Yeah, so my dad had started the first 5 IITs in India, which is an incredible,
big deal.
Huge deal. So and he always said, you got to look at engineering, but as long as dads are involved with it, you don't think about it as much, right? But when I came to this country, it became clear that applying my physics or math, aka engineering, would be a much easier and much more applicable route than a pure science. So I ended up in electrical engineering. And actually, back in my time, your time too, probably, computer science wasn't even offered as a field. And I really wanted
Absolutely.
to do computer science. So I ended up going to the math department to take some computer science classes and enjoying it, doing well.
Yeah, without
So
belying our ages, at that time, electrical engineering was electromagnetic fields and waves, power distribution,
exactly. Thermodynamics and
dynamics,
a lot of analog to digital. I still remember this professor, Italian professor Franco. One day all failed the test because he had given us these sort of problems that were thinking problems. And then he said, this duster, eraser has more brains than you guys do, and you're not going to make it in real world. And it's nice to see Dr. Franco's proud of me now because he says, out of all of them, you had the potential. So he's backtracked a little.
For me, our university offered computer engineering as a
Yeah.
major,
Yeah.
which was this mix between hardware and software, which
That's great.
I really got
Enjoyed.
into,
Yeah.
and we did programming on IMSI 8080s and things of that nature.
Yeah.
What were you using back in the day?
Me too. I did some programming on the Z80
Oh
and
my
the
gosh, yeah.
X86, and I actually got some. I used to come driving to the Silicon Valley to get some samples of chips that had been failed or flawed, because obviously the good ones were sold. And that was more of the assembly programming,
Yeah,
as
yeah,
you remember.
totally.
And then we also did some Fortran high-level programming where I had these batch cards. Do you know about
Sure.
batch cards? Yeah, okay. So those kind of programming was challenging because you'd go there and get all of it done, and then, I was a little careless and ended up dropping the cards. And that was like a moment of, oh my God, I got to reprogram the whole thing
Patch
again.
cards taught you to be precise
They did.
and
They did.
be very, very efficient. So I was always envious of kids like you who got to be in Silicon Valley and could go down the street to Fry's and actually buy
We
Z80s.
did. I mean, in fact, right here, one of the companies I worked at AMD, Fry's was literally a tourism
Yeah,
store,
yeah,
right?
yeah.
Anybody who came would go to Fry's, right? And it was right in our backyard.
Fry's, and there was a place called Weird Stuff Electronics in Sunnyvale. I would always be so jealous of you guys. So graduate Silicon Valley. What was your first job?
Well, first I thought I'd go back with my parents, and this was just, a short stint to get my undergrad done. But life had different plans, and, I interviewed and ended up in a company called Fairchild Semiconductor, who doesn't exist anymore. I think it's part of onsemi.
Fairchild is the grandfather of all
That's right.
semicos.
That's right. A lot of the people I worked with and I trained with, certainly, it had just gotten bought by Schlumberger.
Oh, of course.
And I was, a product engineer, and I had to come in to Milpitas to the design factory and do a lot of the memory chip product and
What
design.
products?
These were memory chips. These were 4K static RAMs that went into ECL, not even CMOS, bipolar. That's right.
ECL. Oh, I don't think
Yeah.
I knew that. I was a product engineer too
I love that field.
at TI on memory.
There you go.
64K DRAM.
Okay, mine was 4K
Yeah.
SRAMs.
Oh my
So
gosh.
what happened in those
I knew
years
that.
is like, first I got super excited. I said, I have a Zircom tester, I have a Sentry
Oh
tester.
gosh.
It's all my own to do things. And obviously it was my path to immigration as well. We talk about H-1Bs at $100,000 a year right now, but, back in those days, engineers were highly sought out, and you just couldn't get enough local people. So from there, I went to AMD, which is where I got my entree into networking.
Why did you leave Fairchild to AMD? I'm always curious. I left TI after about 3 or 4 years, not really knowing all the opportunities that a TI could have given me at the time. But what was your reason for leaving to go to
I got
AMD?
laid off.
That's a good reason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and it's a very humiliating experience, which is why I would never do it to my own employees. But I should have seen it coming. They were like, you're in Mountain View and your job is moving to Puyallup in Washington, and we're going to move all the folks there. And I said, okay, but I'm not moving there. And they said, all right. And they absorbed that piece of data and laid me off, which was the right thing for them to do. For, most of the things happen not because they're taking it personally out on you, but it was a cost cutting measure. But it certainly made me think about what next. And so I took a little bit of a break in India and came back, and I had interviews with a number of the semi companies. It was clear that with my semi background, I'd be.
Yeah.
My husband ended up in Intel and I in AMD, which made for great Christmas parties when we went to see Jerry Sanders'
This
parties.
is late 80s, early 90s?
Yeah, mid to late 80s.
Yeah. And AMD also product engineering or something different?
Yeah, so from there, I actually started out in product engineering, but I had an aha moment where, one of my chips was failing, and it had a packaging bonding problem with bit error rates, and I had to do a lot of, schematic review and check the chips, check the bonds. And it was my first exposure to customers in a somewhat unfriendly setting because they were all angry that their chips weren't
Mm.
working. And so did a lot of yield analysis and engineering analysis. And it got me thinking that there's another side of me after having been 5 years in this field that I'd like to exercise. So I went into a field called product planning. And some of my best learnings came from defining the networking chips that we went on to build, including FDDI and Taxi, which was a parallel to serial converter to cut down the number of cables.
I remember those products.
So great years where every time you wanted to design a product, you actually had to get in front of the CEO and have a justification like you do in front of a VC for a company, right? To get it funded. So part engineering, and this is when I really got into applying my engineering into product planning.
So refresh my memory. AMD, I remember, was big into networking chips
They were.
back
They
in
were.
the day. Were they attacking kind of a custom network or a token ring? I'm trying to think now about AMD
Well, it
back
was
in those days.
high-speed token ring. It was called FDDI, 100 megabit. But we were also very involved in the early days in Ethernet, along with Xerox and Digital Deck.
Yep.
Again, now we've gone from mainframes to super minis.
Right.
We're moving up in the stack here. And we even did some 1 megabit Starland, but my greatest memories were the 100 megabit FDDI backbone chips we designed.
Which was super high speed for back in the
Really
day.
high speed, but they were designed, you'll get a kick out of this, on LSI gate arrays that were running at, 10,000 gates.
Oh my gosh.
We never talked about nanometer. They were all in micrometer
Why
technologies.
gate arrays and not custom design?
Probably because we were still feeling our way into, and the cost of it too.
Yeah.
So at that time, the early designs, we were didn't even have much of a custom design component to it. You just sort of designed it and threw it to them. And through that experience, I realized, oh my God, by the time you define a chip, design it, and get it out to the market, it can be 5 to 7 years. Markets can go by then. And so that's how I went into the system side. I said, this is fun, but I want a little more instant gratification. And joined a company called Unger & Vass, which was actually at that time bigger than Cisco, if you can believe it. So I ran there.
Yeah,
And
of
they
course.
competed with 3Com, and
Yeah.
right. And again, somehow every company I joined ended up getting acquired. This one got acquired by Tandem Computers, and which then in turn got acquired by Compaq, which then in turn is HP. So somewhere there's some UB there. But built the first bridges and routers even before Cisco did. They were XNS routers, not IP routers. But we worked very closely with Cisco. Cisco was 5 million, and my division in Unger & Vass was 50 million.
And this is now probably mid-90s.
Yeah, early 90s, 91, 92, 93.
Pre-internet.
Yes, pre-internet. And then I had to do what everyone does. Did you do your startup too? Did you do a startup? Which one was that?
I did Tensilica.
Oh, yeah. I know that one. So mine was Crescendo Communications.
You made a good choice.
Well, it was a short-lived choice. I was only there 2 years before we got bought in 93 as Cisco's first acquisition.
How many people were at Crescendo?
At the time, probably 50, 60 people.
So I remember when I joined Tensilica, I had always had the dream of joining a startup. It was the one thing I wanted to do in Silicon Valley.
Right.
I knew nothing about startups.
You don't till you get into it.
You get into it. What were the things looking back that really surprised you about that experience?
Well, some things surprised me, but I had worked with them. On the Unger & Vass side, we had worked on an FDDI copper spec with them, and we were trying to figure out where
they were your customer.
They were not my customer. We were working on standards together. We were working on whether it would be PAM4 or what the technology would be. So I had a chance to get to know the people. And to me, in a startup, the people are the greatest choice you can make because, people can shape any technology and get a product, but products can only be shaped by people, right? So in some ways, it wasn't a shock because I'm like, okay, I think I know what I'm getting into. But I couldn't have imagined the complexity of, okay, you can get a product, but how do you get it to market and how do you get it to your customers? And that's where I came in. And certainly it was it was an exercise of one by one. We were fortunate. We won 2 important customers. And in fact, Microsoft's been a big part of my life, not only in Crescendo, but Cisco and of course now Arista. They were one of our early customers. And Redmond had just started then. Their new buildings were just coming up. There was an FDDI backbone. We got a chance to work with them. I don't think I could have estimated the complexity of building a technology versus going to market with a technology. It was hard.
I mean, back then, a lot of these companies were being acquired and snapped up super fast by Bay Networks or Nortel or 3Com.
Yeah.
Was Crescendo, when they started, did they view that ultimately this is going to be an acquisition or we're going to go
Not at
IPO?
all. In fact, we were all very sad that day. You have to remember, back in '93, acquisitions was still not a fad, and we got bought for 90 million,
Yeah.
which is pretty pittance if you think of it in today's age. But it gave us all a sense of accomplishment, and at that time, Cisco was less than $1 billion
But for
in
Cisco, it's
revenue.
a huge acquisition.
It was
In terms of strategy.
undoubtedly. Cisco was a router company at roughly 800 million revenue, and I got a chance personally to go build their switching business and build and name the Catalyst
Yeah.
switches, which went on to become a 10 to $15 billion business.
That
And
was the growth engine for Cisco.
absolutely. And part of it is I think we all agonized about going there, and we had signed agreements to stay there 2 years, but we ended up being there 15 years, 2 years at a time. Right. And I think we contributed greatly, but Cisco also gave us a platform to contribute. It was both ways.
One thing that Cisco did, and as you said, you were one of the early ones, and then Cisco just went on a tear, whether it was
Oh, yeah.
Granite, et
Oh, yeah.
cetera,
Yeah.
did an amazingly good job of somehow integrating these startups
Yeah.
into the company. And culturally, looking back, I'm just wondering, how did they work so well? What did they
Well, I
do?
think John Mogridge was the CEO then. John Chambers was the head of sales, and they both taught me different lessons. John Mogridge was like, "Look at your margins; they're in their 50s. When are you going to get them up to our number, which is 70s and 80s?" I said, "All right, we got to do some cost reductions and start building ASICs and all the
Yep.
things you have to do to make your boards." John Chambers, though, was a wealth and depth of knowledge in how to go to market. We didn't have much of a sales force, but he was instrumental in investing in a sales force, and he told them all, don't just sell routers. You got to sell switches. They are the future.
Right.
So I think they both came at it, and I thought I'd go nuts listening to two of them. One wants high margin, one wants to get to $1 billion. There's no way I'm going to last here more than 2 years. But I think the biggest credit I would give Cisco at that time is they identified the talent in people, nurtured them, and left them alone. And that was a huge part of
How did the engineering cultures mix, or did they need to? In
they
other
didn't
words,
need to.
you could be fairly self-sufficient.
So here's a good example. So Cisco had iOS, and
And that's old That's not the
that's the
iOS that
old
most of our listeners would
no,
think of.
not today's iOS, but the original iOS, I should
Yeah,
say, back in the 90s. And when Crescendo came with Catalyst, we brought in something called CatOS,
I
right?
remember
And so
that.
CatOS and iOS were, kind of two-headed monsters. Even today, when I talk to customers who see the Catalyst 6500 as the most successful product in the industry, they'll go, "I like that product because it had iOS," and somebody else will go, "I like that product because it had CatOS." But we actually built a two-headed monster because we just couldn't get it all in one. And practically speaking, if we had tried to get it all in one, it would have taken us 5 years. So it would have been a long time, and you would have seen the market go by,
So you're
right?
running both operating systems?
Yeah, so we on a switching layer 2 basis, we ran the CatOS, and then when we needed the layer 3, we brought in the iOS as a routing blade into that. So
Oh,
like I said, it
interesting.
was a two-headed monster. Many didn't like it for that, and then we tried to mix and match it, but it was the right call from a business point of view because we were able to basically go from 40 million in revenue in the first year we were acquired to 365, which I remember that number well because it was million a day for the year, to $1 billion the third year. And we, obviously, this is the wave of AI, and that was the wave of the World Wide Web and
And
internet.
Crescendo then ended up being the switching business
That's right.
for
We ended
Cisco.
up buying Kalpana and Granite and
Alpana, that's
Grand
right.
Junction
Oh, I
because we
forgot all
built
those
the
names.
high-end switches, but then we needed the portfolio.
So how did you, I hate to use this word, but assimilate the Granites of the worlds and the Kalpanas into the Cat 5000 family, engineering-wise? Again, were they bolt-ons
No,
or
we tried to keep their strengths.
yeah,
Each of them, when you look at Grand Junction and Granite, they had fantastic strength in building chips and ASICs. We wanted
yep,
to keep it. But we also try to enforce the portfolio.
right,
We're like, hey, you can't go off and do another OS.
right,
Come and take ours, right?
right.
So there were some moments, but it was really good portfolio management. And the teams really got along. We called it Work Group Business Unit, WBU. And today, the reason I know Andy and his team so well is they were the basis for the Cat 4K,
Right.
and they worked to integrate where it
And
made
Cisco,
sense.
again, is almost the boilerplate for the success story on
Yeah.
M&A. Why were they so good at it? What was the blueprint that made Cisco so good at making that work? Because they were in our world class in that.
I think they had the success of a few good acquisitions that didn't just go well, but went very well,
Mhm.
which could make up for some of them that went less well.
Mm,
It's always like that. So, if they did 40, 50 acquisitions, maybe 5 and 10 were very good, and that's the ones we talk about.
right.
And the others were not as good, but they weren't bad either,
Yeah.
right? So some of them were just home runs,
Yeah.
Or like in cricket, they were fours and sixes rather than singles.
I just look at M&A on the top line. You can look at it the way an investment banker looks at it, and you see
Yeah,
the bar charts and the
yeah,
revenue and what's
yeah.
accretive. But
Yeah,
to your point, relative to people,
yeah.
products come down to people,
It
and
does.
ultimately getting people to work together, particularly when you've got a small company culture, into a
It's hard.
large engine. That's hard.
I didn't think I'd stay there, but part
Hard.
of the credit I have to give Cisco is they nurtured the people, and when they saw the success of the switching division, they let those people be leaders inside of Cisco. And I always tell people I was a misfit in Cisco because I didn't fit the executive ranks and talk the talk, walk the walk.
Mhm.
But in some ways, I grew up in Cisco because they let me do
Yeah.
and make mistakes or make success. So I think a lot of credit goes to them for helping cultivate the entrepreneurial side.
I want to talk about Arista, obviously, and AI, but just one last thing on the Cisco thing. They did the spin out and spin in of
Yeah,
Luca,
yeah,
Mario, and Prem a lot.
yeah, they did.
What made that work so well? All great guys.
Great engineers. I think what started happening in Cisco, like it happens in many corporations, is the ability to innovate slows down no matter how good you are because you're a victim of existing products and things you're doing, right? So the only way to get more innovation was to cordon them off, if you will. And you could have cordoned them off in a different building or you could cordon them off to do spin-ins, but you have to also remember hiring talent was non-trivial at
Yeah.
that time. So the combination of needing talent, putting a focus, not letting them worry about the legacy business, the traditional business, so they could go do this, I think made it very successful. The flip side of that, which I never did and I never was part of it, is because it did create a huge morale issue when they came back on the haves and the have-nots, right? Because there are very many good engineers there. So I think it worked very well as long as they built products that were complementary to what Cisco is already
Yeah.
doing. Then it was a natural. Nobody could object because they were adding a creative value.
It's a win.
Yeah,
It's really-
exactly.
So,
Win-win. Yeah.
so tell us about how 15 years at Cisco, you're doing amazing. You're running a giant business. What happens with Arista?
Well, I was in my mid 40s, and there's this moment of, I guess, midlife crisis, if you want to call it that, where you kind of say, are you going to retire here or are you going to do something else? Right. And I felt like Cisco had become a very big company, but I'd also felt like I had contributed and done all I can. And while I wasn't sure exactly what I was going to do next, it wasn't clear it was Arista. I knew if I stayed on and got comfortable, I would never do anything different. So it was one of those, forcing yourself to make a decision and think about it, where I knew if I had the gas in the tank to do one or two more, that now's the time to think about it. So it was less about leaving Cisco and more about not knowing what I'd do next, but wanting to do something next.
Yeah. Yeah. That
And
very similar to me.
yeah,
Yeah.
I remember you telling me the
Yeah.
same thing, right?
There was nothing wrong
Which is the
at
best
NVIDIA
way.
per se.
Yeah.
A wonderful company, and
Yeah.
obviously what they've done is legendary.
Oh my God. Yeah.
But for me, it was about scratching a different itch.
Right. And in fact, I had a lot of people say, you got a powerful position. Why are you leaving? The company's great. But I think, like you with NVIDIA, you get to a point where you say, oh, that's true. But how can I make a difference again?
Yeah.
And what I enjoyed at Cisco greatly was the impact and the contribution I could make to them. And is it possible to do it again? And
Yeah.
I have to tell you, while I did it, there was an incredible fear of failure. I have to admit that. I was scared about that decision too. I had no idea what I was going to do. And everybody looks back and, it looks like a rosy dream and journey come true, but it wasn't without its moments.
And the role you took was the CEO role at Arista.
Yeah, so I took the summer off. I actually looked at a lot of different technologies and security and, energy and clean tech was very big at that point. So Vinod, Khosla had a lot of companies I was looking at. But I ultimately concluded that I didn't have a PhD on those topics. I had a PhD in networking
Mhm.
through work, not through a degree. And
I like how you put that. That's pretty accurate.
yeah, except for the honorary degree I got for speaking at Santa Clara graduation. But the point was, if I wasn't going to leverage what I knew and build on it, and if I wanted to start again, then I would be making myself a whole lot more uncomfortable. And I don't know if I could contribute
Mhm.
in the same fashion, right? So Andy and I have been friends back when he says we were kids. He says I was a little girl, but I remind him he was a little boy. I was in my 20s, he was in his early 30s when I was at AMD and he was at Sun.
Mhm.
And he said, hey, I've funded this company and we're building the software stack. And They were just shaping what they wanted to do. They were
Hmm.
thinking, should we build a switch? It was largely software. They weren't building any merchant silicon and hardware in any substantial way. And I said, oh, switching, Andy, I just came out of that. Why would I do this again, right? But when I met the team, there was, again, back to the story you and I have talked about many times, it's the people.
Yep.
And I came away very impressed with the founders. Ken Duda built this amazing extensible operating system. And we didn't exactly know how it would shape. It was zero revenue. It was 30 engineers. But I remember Andy and I having this discussion saying it'd be great to go from 0 to 100 million, right? And I said, yeah, right.
So
And
pre-revenue,
pre-revenue, 0,
30 people.
30 engineers.
That's a very fun and scary time.
Yes, it is. We were at the basement of a lawyer building that has since gone bankrupt. And we live to tell the story.
Yeah. And that was 2000,
That was 2008,
2008.
right in the middle of the financial crisis and recession.
Incredibly brave.
That's what everybody says.
Incredibly brave.
That's what everybody says, yes.
And when did Arista go public?
2014.
2014. So
Yeah.
not long after.
6 years. And it took 6 years because
That's very, very fast.
in one way it's fast, but in another way, we did take our time. We took 4 years to build the software
Yeah.
system and another 6 years to productize and get revenue. We wanted to get substantial size. Be careful what you ask for.
Right.
You go public and then, as you know, you've got another whole constituent to please with shareholders. So we were north of 400 million when we went public with a market cap of 3 billion or so.
Yeah.
But the best news of it all was we had a product, our high frequency trading, low latency. We had entered some of the world's largest cloud customers and defined and pioneered a leaf spine architecture, which until then was maybe done in HPC by InfiniBand.
Just huge.
And I think the barrier to entry with our software was undeniable. So I think getting all the trifecta of great innovation, great team, and great customers was important.
When you took the job, 30 engineers, 2008, how far could you see? In other words, how big did you think it could be?
It was one step at a time. I think we thought we could get from 0 to 100 million. I don't think we imagined 1 billion or 5 billion or the 10 billion that I've promised the street in 2026 ever.
Could ever imagine that?
No, I would be kidding. I was not clairvoyant enough to think that way. However, we did know we were attacking a large market, but we also knew, having been at Cisco, we had deep regard and respect for what they had accomplished over decades, not years. So we were realistic about really focusing on the niche markets.
So when you were doing all hands and people would ask the question about how big of a company could we be, how would you answer that question?
Yeah, that's probably a bad answer on my part, but we would say, we're not competing with Cisco. We're a niche networking company. We could get to 100 million, but there's a path to $1 billion valuation. I remember Andy's talking about the road to $1 billion. I said, Andy, how can we say that when we have no valuation right now? So he was the bolder of the two.
Right.
I was the conservative one. But between the two, I think what we could definitely tell the teams, all hands, is this is a special company.
Yeah.
It's got a neat culture. It's engineers, driving engineers. Even in our customers were engineers. It's prioritizing innovation over sales quotas or commissions or just selling the last thing we wanted to sell. And that we were building something with a strong foundation and a long journey. So that naturally attracted a set of people, and it didn't attract some people, for sure.
Percentage of the original 30 who were there when you got there?
More than half,
That's incredible.
Yeah.
That's actually really incredible.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And now, inside our company, I tend not to like to talk about the numbers too much because to me they're kind of outcomes. But when we think about the opportunity in front of us now with all things with AI, it does appear almost unbounded.
Yeah, there are days we all have been through the bubble where you go, is this a bubble? But I think not, for a number of reasons that I'm sure you've thought through too, which is there may be moments of highs and lows, but there is a genuine need to improve applications and software, and therefore a genuine need to build an infrastructure to do that, right? So unlike the internet bubble, where you had a whole bunch of CLECs that kind of went, build it and it'll come, and we'll wait for it to come. These are responsible companies that are building out this infrastructure, that have financial depth, but also conviction to spend more, to do more, right? So I think it is unique times. It may not last forever, but I think it's just like the Industrial Revolution and the Internet Revolution. I think the AI revolution revolution is very real.
It's a good analogy because the internet revolution, remember that, yes, it was a bubble in the sense of the spend versus
Yeah.
demand.
Yeah.
But you had companies like Global Crossing and things of that nature that just vanished off the face of the
Oh my
earth.
God, they did. Yeah.
And then the other big difference is back in 2000, the most valuable companies on the planet were not Microsoft, Meta,
No,
Nvidia, Amazon. We're now in a world where this growth is being fueled by, the largest companies on the planet.
exactly.
There is a part of me, though, that looks at it and says, at some point, does gravity take over, and can we really make use of 100 gigawatts, a terawatt? But to your point, the dimension of problems that are unsolved, that could be solved by artificial intelligence, definitely appears to be unlimited. So I'm very much more on the bull side than the bear side, but it's going to be a fascinating thing to see where it goes.
I think, you could argue that the training models require all of these multi-gigawatt, but you could also argue that you can have a distributed inference set of models too that require multiples
Yeah.
of megawatt. Maybe it's aggregates into a gigawatt, but whichever way you get there, going back to our analogies, we went from mainframe to super mini to client server to the PC to the phone, right? So it may come in a mini-me mode or it may come in a more macro mode like it does right now, but it's here.
But we're going to be serving tokens all day long.
Small, medium, or large, absolutely.
So obviously you've been hugely successful with Arista, long career at Cisco, AMD,
And
Fairchild.
congratulations to you on ARM, right?
thank-
It's
thank
great
you
to
so
watch
much.
that as well.
Who are your mentors that you've had in your career? A,
Yeah.
any
Yeah.
you'd like to name, and B, what did they teach you?
Well, I think along the way, I've had lots of mentors. We'll start with my younger age. My dad and mom were heavy influencers. They raised two daughters and they raised them to do whatever they could do and pushed us to the limits, right? My dad was a physicist himself. So, he believed in tough love and he gave a lot of tough love. But definitely, I would say they were my early mentors. My family, my husband, and everybody, huge supporters. You can't do what we
Yeah.
do without that
Yeah.
support. I still remember Vijay, my husband, encouraging me when I was in pure engineering and saying, you can do it, you can go to the other side. And I don't consider myself a trained business person. I don't have an MBA, but live and learn, as they say, right? So I think that's a huge part of the family support
Yep.
is so important as well. Along the way, I've had some great bosses. Without naming them, some of them were in AMD. You may know them. Do you know John East? John East
Sure,
was a
sure.
wonderful human being, great mentor, and people there who trained me everything from, okay, you're taking your first flight to Boston. Let me show you on the map how you land and take the Sumner Tunnel and deal with those aggressive drivers there. Everything from how to travel to the first luggable I had. I think it was a compact luggable top or whatever. And to my professors,
Yep.
I owe a lot to my physics teachers, my professors in undergrad who came to my going away when I left Cisco. And it's so nice that they remember me as a studious nerd, but for some reason they also remember me as having potential, which is nice,
Oh,
right? At that time,
That's
you're
wonderful.
so not confident of yourself. And then obviously through my career, I would not call them I would call them colleagues, mentors, friends, because after a while it isn't who you work for.
Yeah.
It's the circle you
It's the
form.
ecosystem.
It is the
Absolutely.
ecosystem. And I'm proud to call you a member of that ecosystem.
Wow.
So
Ditto. And as we chatted before, it's amazing the similarities of our backgrounds and
yeah,
how we all got here. But
yeah.
successful CEO, successful mother, grandmother.
Yes.
Jayshree, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Rene. It's an absolute pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this month's episode of Tech Unheard. We'll be back next month for another look behind the boardroom door. To be sure you don't miss new episodes, follow Tech Unheard wherever you get your podcasts. Until then, Tech Unheard is a custom podcast series from ARM and National Public Media, and I'm ARM CEO Rene Haas. Thanks for listening to Tech Unheard.
ARM Tech Unheard is a custom podcast series from ARM and National Public Media. Executive producers Erica Osher and Shannon Boerner. Project manager Colin Harden. Creative lead producer Isabel Robertson. Editors Andrew Meriwether and Kelly Drake. Composer Aaron Levison. ARM production contributors include Ami Badani, Claudia Brandon, Simon Jared, Jonathan Armstrong, Ben Webdell, Sofia McKenzie, Kristen Ray, and Saumil Shah. Tech Unheard is hosted by ARM Chief Executive Officer Rene Haas.